Number three, big story, Russia, Ukraine. Okay. There's no doubt that President Trump's momentum coming out of his meeting in Anchorage with Putin, coming out of his meeting in Washington with European leaders and Mr. Zelensky, there's no doubt that the momentum has stalled. And so the question now is, where is the momentum? Where is the possibility of a deal? And is it up to Putin now to make the next move, or it's up to Trump? Over the weekend, again, while we were off, as we were coming back, extraordinary meeting in China. Putin attending, Mr. Modi of India, other world leaders attending. And the coverage of it suggested that not only has Donald Trump not got momentum out of his Alaska summit, but his needed leverage over Putin to try to end the war is at a minimum. Here is coverage of the meeting from the BBC. Is S3, please.
The Chinese government would say that under Donald Trump, the US is going it alone with its America First policies, with its chaotic tariffs, and the contrast he would say is with this body and with China, saying that they can offer stability, a more certain world, and bring about development in a calm and constructive way. At least that's the messaging. And certainly the symbolism.
Yeah, the symbolism of Putin there with the Chinese, with the Indian leader, it's horrible. Now, you could argue that President Trump helped to rehab Putin by meeting with him, made it easier for these world leaders to meet with him. But this has been a long-running story, not just in the context of the U.S., of the Ukrainian-Russia conflict, but in general, since Putin took power. The challenge for American presidents is, how do you get leverage over the guy? How do you get leverage over the guy? And I don't see it right now. So what's it going to take? And this is a lot of what September will be about. Will the Europeans, who have been pretty hawkish and pretty aggressive at saying Putin needs to be repelled, the war needs to end on favorable terms for Ukraine, will the Europeans couple with this American president with whom they've been at odds and form a Biden-like, dare I say it, coalition to say more sanctions, including against maybe the Chinese and the Indians, secondary sanctions, and some sort of further arming of the Ukrainians? I had thought before the break that the ball was in Putin's court, but it's clear now he's not in any hurry to meet with Zelensky. It doesn't look like he will. He's not in any hurry to make any concessions. And so this story, in some ways, the biggest in the world, because until this war ends, there's so much disruption, so much death, so much carnage. What does Donald Trump do? It's a massive decision. He created some deadlines, some of which have already passed, one of which is coming up, but he faces a choice now. He cannot, as Putin continues to kill civilians and others in Ukraine, he cannot wait, I believe, into the fall. He's going to have to make a decision, again, pair of decisions on economic sanctions and on military. All right, number four also involves an international conflict, and one the president has been hoping to solve. That is, what is Israel doing about Gaza? While we were off, lots of announcements from the Israeli government about plans to go into Gaza City, to move civilians as much as possible out of Gaza City through checkpoints. This escalation of the conflict causing even more international scrutiny on Israel. President Trump has so far been relatively quiet. He doesn't want people to be starved in Gaza, but Israel's moving with a relatively free hand. And the continued issue in Israel of those Israelis who still have not been freed, either their remains or those few hostages who are still alive, is front and center in Israel. Here is recent remarks from Prime Minister Netanyahu on the topic. S4, please.
Both were kidnapped, and their bodies were taken to Gaza. This operation reflects our unwavering commitment to returning all of our abducted. The cabinet has resolved to defeat Hamas and release every one of our abducted. The considerable effort to implement that decision is already underway.
Nothing I like more than the voice of an AI translator. But the point is, Israel's being very aggressive now, and they've got to find some sort of way to thread the needle, get their hostages back, not cause further famine and hunger in Gaza, but also deal with the situation. And of course, for the president, report while we were gone from the Washington Post that the president's still looking at some sort of plan for governing Gaza, where Hamas is not in the picture, for rebuilding Gaza, for bringing people back, for creating economic opportunity. But I would say that this decision, along with the one about Ukraine and Russia, are monstrous international choices national security choices for the president, who's got a base that doesn't want a forever war. But the president is well aware that he's got a singular, unique responsibility on this. All right, number 5 is the Fed. Lots going on there. It's a great political story as President Trump tries to force out the head of the Fed and a Fed governor, Ms. Cook, who is being questioned about her mortgage situation. This is a complicated story that involves, housing prices and interest rates and the ability of the president to try to manage the Fed. This month, the Fed is meeting the 23rd, I think, to potentially lower rates, and people widely expect them to do it, which is what the president's wanted. But nonetheless, the pressure on the Fed remains, including on Cook, and she's got some trouble. What they're saying is the president fired her while we were off. The president fired her, and he said, I can fire her for cause. And the cause he's citing is that the allegations, not adjudicated by a court, not still very well understood, that she had multiple mortgages on which she claimed at least 2 homes were her primary residence. Now, this has gotten caught up in the partisanship of it all, but here is a relatively straightforward explanation from an independent analyst, legal analyst at CNN. He believes that Cook does in fact have a problem and that the courts could well say it's sufficient cause for the president to remove her and to replace her on the Fed with someone who he thinks would go in line with his desire to raise interest rates. This is CNN analyst on S4, please.
No explanation of how this happened. And the claim that this might be clerical error or just a mistake, that's not going to fly. I think that the allegations on their face could be enough for a judge to say, look, I'm going to defer to the president on cause.
Incredibly important, interesting story related to the Fed, related to the president's use of power, and of course, does affect the real economy. So we'll keep watching, but I think that this story of trying to drive her out, the courts while we were off ruled that heard hearing at a hearing about Cook's situation remains unresolved, but it's going to be an interesting one. And that goes to number 6 on my list, which is the question of tariffs. Okay, President Trump is not President Tariffs, President and the courts, which relates to tariffs. Tariffs was a big decision that came down while we were off, but there's so many decisions headed to the Supreme Court. And I've said this along with others since the beginning of President Trump's aggressive use of power in this administration, that there's going to be lots of cases to get to the Supreme Court. And he's not going to win them all and he's not going to lose them all. But what his scorecard is there and how these decisions come down will speak a great deal to the question of how successful he is, because he's trying to do on tariffs, on the Fed, on immigration, on policing. He's trying to do so many things that have never been done before. He's testing the limits of presidential power. Donald Trump's view is that only suckers as president act restrained. He felt that way in the first term. He feels it even more now. And what he's trying to do is to use maximum power and try his luck in the courts. On tariffs, this decision that came down said he's exceeded his authority, saying he's allowed to impose all these country by country tariffs based on an emergency. Here's the way Fox Business reported the story. S5, please.
Tariffs, although we're seeing courts affirming pretty decisively here that they are not legal, politicians are going to want this money. And to your point about Bessent's estimate, it's in line with the Congressional Budget Office. They're saying $4 trillion over 10 years or more total tariff revenue under the new Trump stuff. Well, this basically entirely offsets his income tax restraint in the one big beautiful bill. So if you're looking for economic growth, this is, I think, great news.
This is big casino. This question of whether the tariffs stay in place, not just the revenue and the attempt to bring production back home, but to get better deals. I continue to believe that the main purpose of these tariffs is to open markets and to get leverage over China for an eventual deal with China. So this is big stuff, lots of pressure on the courts. But in the meantime, until we see how the Supreme Court resolves this, this is a big deal as the president tries to continue, along with his aides, to strike deals for trade. So continue to watch his relationship with the courts on a range of issues. The district court, court of appeals, very few of these decisions are enforced. They could be, but they're choosing mostly not to. or sometimes they choose to, and then the Supreme Court stays it. So it takes a while. The wheels of justice grind so slowly. I wish the Supreme Court would fast track some of this stuff. I know that's not their normal way of behaving, but these issues are affecting not just the politics of it, not just the president's power, but the real lives of Americans. I wish these things were occurring faster across the board. The uncertainty on the tariffs is not great for business, but we've seen people adapt. COVID it's allowed businesses to be a lot more flexible than before. Back in 2020, people on the American left pushed very hard to get children's books into schools, getting all sorts of titles onto the bookshelves. Things like Activist Baby, Woke Baby, Anti-Racist Baby, and Non-Binary Baby. Well, our new sponsor thought if we're doing the whole political kids books thing, we shouldn't leave out a book called Capitalist Baby. So here you go. Capitalist Baby, a fun illustrated A to Z kids book, is now on sale at Amazon.com. Capitalist Baby is a beautifully illustrated, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, and a clever A to Z book for kids and parents who love business and capitalism. Best part is this: Capitalist Baby is optimistic. It celebrates the ideas of an American entrepreneurship and business. It is instructive without any preaching. Real business concepts are woven into the charming text and into the illustrations. Capitalist Baby is your alternative to the leftist kids book so popular after 2020. Buy Capitalist Baby now for yourself, your kids, and as a gift. It's a delightful read that deserves a spot on your bookshelf. For the first time in human history, there's an A to Z alphabet book for people who believe in free enterprise, entrepreneurship, and commerce. So right now, go buy a copy or buy 3. Search Capitalist Baby on Amazon.com today.